Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories. This week we talked to Donald H. Taylor and Eglė Vinauskaitė, who are the authors of a new report on AI and learning called AI and L&D 2025 Race for Impact. We were very excited to have Don and Eglė back. They've been on our podcast before talking about their research. And this most recent report, which was dropped just a couple of weeks ago, talks about how AI is being utilized in L&D and how that has changed over the past 2 years. In those 2 years, they've dropped 4 different reports that have provided not just insights into how organizations are using it, but models on how to think about AI in L&D and what's happening. One of the most interesting things that their report came out with this year is something that aligns with our megatrends, which is that L&D organizations are moving past just experimenting with AI, and they're actually implementing it into the work that they do in the systems that they create. We also had some pretty good philosophical discussions about how long it's going to be before AI is just in the water. We're no longer talking about AI itself, but we're talking about what AI enables within the organization. And maybe more importantly for L&D, we talked about how this is affecting the job of L&D professionals going forward and how this might change how they show value to that organization. Finally, we talked about 3 different futures. That's futures with an S. Don and Eglė laid out 3 different roles that L&D can play and how that might look very different from the traditional L&D department. Those 3 roles are the skills authority, the enablement partner, and the adaptation engine. We really encourage you to listen to this podcast. It was a really great discussion, and we encourage you to download the report and read the report. It's just 60 pages of wonderful data as well as stories of organizations doing really great things. And with that, we hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Hey, Don and Eglė, welcome to Workplace Stories.
Great to be here.
Today, we're going to be talking about L&D and AI. You both just dropped a report called AI and L&D 2025 Race for Impact. So we want to get into some of the data that you found and some of the things that you're seeing over the evolution of 2 years of studying AI and L&D. Before we get into that, you've been on our podcast before, but let's remind people of who you are. So could you both just take a minute and tell us about yourselves?
I'll go first. I'm Don Taylor. I'm the founder of the L&D Survey Series, the chair of the Learning Technologies Conference in London, and I do research and writing, speaking about what's happening in our field.
Woohoo!
And I'm Eglė Vinauskaitė, Director of Nodes, a studio focused on the people side of AI adoption. I work with organizations on AI strategy and L&D for organizational learning, as well as change programs for wider AI adoption.
Okay, so this is going to be a stupid question because you both just established your credibility, but tell us why we should listen to you on this topic.
It's a great question because all too often, especially when something's new, armchair experts pop up and it's right to be skeptical to ask them for their credentials. I've been working in the field of learning and technology since the 1980s, and I take the long view on stuff. With Eglė, we've been looking particularly at AI in L&D since pretty much 6 months into the launch of ChatGPT and following it since then. So we've got the perspective over those years, plus we've got the longer term perspective of what's going on. So that's my credentials. Eglė, I think, can speak for herself.
Yeah, I think what you said, this is it. We've been running this industry survey for as long as we could start capturing the data. So it's really interesting to track its use and trends and what's happening in the industry.
That's awesome. So, well, maybe we just jump right in then. Everyone is wondering, I'm talking to many people that are wondering what the heck is going on with L&D and AI. We've heard a lot about content creation, which we'll get into in a minute. But I'm really curious. This is your 4th report in 2 years. And I'm wondering what you all have seen. What are the biggest changes you all have seen?
Eglė, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah. So at a high level, when we first started out in 2023, it was very experimental. And this year, obviously, we had this inflection where the majority of people are now using instead of experimenting with AI. And with that came more exploration, more uses, more cross-pollination, because everyone's building on each other's work. Everyone's getting inspired by everyone else. So it's compounds. It means that the use of AI and L&D is no longer an if, but it's a how, or how we can use it better. Because in 2023, the question was, is this hype? Will people use it? What do I do with it? In 2024, there were emerging practices of AI use, a lot more experimentation. And the question was, can AI be actually useful beyond some writing tasks? And this year, AI is now used by the majority. What used to be pilots last year is regular use this year. And with that, there are a lot of things that have stayed similar, but there are also these pockets of innovation and some directions that we are exploring as an industry, seemingly.
I think that point about pockets of innovation is a really good one. Superficially, a lot of the use seems to be the same, but there's little straws in the wind that indicate really increasing sophistication in various different areas. There's one other thing which I think is worth noting. 3 years ago, nobody had any idea what was happening. It is still the case that today people are saying, all right, I hear the noise, but how is L&D actually using AI? And that's really the question that we're trying to answer in all of the reports we give, which is, well, what the heck is going on? And look, here are some great case studies, some great stories of people really using it, and we're going to help you learn from that. That's always the aim, is not to be proscriptive, oh, this is what we think you should do, but rather descriptive, look, this is what's happening. We do, however, draw, of course, some conclusions about what we might want people to do, but we'll cover that later on.
Yeah, I'm excited for that discussion. Talk to me a little bit about what do you think has changed? So 2 years ago, everybody's experimenting. Now everybody's sort of jumped in.
Well, I think to come back to the inflection point thing, I think one of the key things is what Eglė said, which is that now in our surveyed population, over half of people say they are using it. And that means not they're piloting it, but they either say they're using it or they're using it extensively. So that's fascinating. And it means for me that it's part of the toolkit. Okay, that's one change. Another change is that although superficially the uses are very similar, it's largely focused on content, some things have jumped up the table of uses that we look at with people. In particular, there has been an increase in a number of people saying they use it for qualitative data analysis. Almost everything else is ranked the same as it was last year, but qualitative data analysis, in a list of 12 things we gave people to choose from, was ranked 8th last year and 5th this year. And that's a big change. And it means that people are using AI for manipulating data at scale. It's words rather than numbers, but it still represents a different approach to what we've been doing in the past, which was, well, we're going to do the old thing faster. We're going to make more content faster. Now it's, well, we're going to do something a bit new. We're going to trawl through words and find out what's going on. For me, that's actually quite a big change. It's a small change in terms of the overall picture, but I think it's indicative of the way people are now using and thinking about AI.
Yeah, I agree. There was a noticeable shift in the use of qualitative analysis in L&D. And this has been a journey because in 2023, when we first did our research, I remember going through all of the open-ended responses where people can write in how they're using AI. And I found 4 responses out of over 300 talking about any kind of data analysis. And this year, it's obviously now going up the chart. There are other differences. So one of them is happening on the learning design side. Obviously, there is a lot of use of AI for content development, as well as some learning design tasks. But one change that's happening is that, or not change, but this is where the innovation is going, some interesting uses, is where AI is being used not just in the background by learning designers to help create whatever they later just put on the LMS chip or program that they launch. It's used as part of the learning experience. So there might be an assistant with your course, or you might have an instructor-led course, and then you also have this little helper that helps people during their whatever project work in between learning events. There's also use of dynamic feedback. So you're using AI in the learning experience. The person can interact with it, and you can get rid of canned multiple choice responses that everyone hates and knows that this is probably not the best way to do it. And you can actually do a lot of more interesting things. So now you can ask people to upload essays, problem solutions, case study analysis. So you can do a lot more. You can ask people to do a lot more deeper cognitive work And that means that it improves the experience of whatever the skill they're developing. There's also the fact that role plays are going mainstream. That was something that they were being piloted last year here and there. There was still a lot of concerns. This is going to work out. Is it the right tools? Is it good enough? But yeah, technology has improved itself, has become more reliable to be launched across an enterprise. And now we are seeing that the whole industry is, first, there's a lot of push on the vendor side. There are so many different chatbots that you can use, but also they are being used internally as well. We have podcasts as a new thing that has emerged, something that's probably because of Notebook LM. So a whole new modality. We have changing definition of personalization. So people, before, when we would think about personalization, we would think about adaptive learning or content curation, things like that, like platform-driven, essentially content, serving content to the right people. And now, for example, this year, what came out is that there is a very interesting use of AI, which is usually DIY, where L&D teams, they set up something like a custom GPT so that people can upload their performance reviews and it suggests a development path. And this is something that started popping up all over the place, just without people coordinating, just writing in these responses that, yeah, we're doing this thing, which is very interesting to see how, yeah, it's not something that was like an obvious use case, but here we go.
So let's maybe take a step back, because I want to talk a little bit more about this. So first of all, we're seeing AI usage sort of explode in L&D in much deeper ways than we've seen in the past, which just makes me so excited about the things we can do now that we haven't been able to do before. I'm interested in sort of the makeup of the L&D teams that are being successful at this. You know what I mean? So obviously it's more available and it's more sort of mainstream than it ever has been. Do you see a difference in the types of teams that are leveraging this as far as mindset goes or organization or anything like that versus those that maybe aren't leveraging it as much?
We've discussed this quite a lot, haven't we? This sense that there are, well, I think we should talk about the complexity scale to begin with here. The idea that there isn't a simple, you can look at the uses of AI and L&D and you can describe them as being simple on one side and they go over to being sophisticated on the other side. And I think if we describe those first, Eglė, perhaps you could describe some of the stages on that. And then I might talk about, well, is there a natural progression across that complexity scale? Eglė?
Yeah, so back in 2023, we put together the scale where we listed the key verticals of AI use in L&D on a scale from simple to sophisticated. Simple as defined by AI uses that L&D can take advantage of just by itself. And then on a sophisticated end, where L&D would need extra skills, technology, or relationships to make those use cases happen. And obviously we had, if you can imagine, let me see if I can recall off the top. So from left to right, we have admin tasks, then learning design and content and personalization, skill development, data analysis, performance support, which is, like assistance, knowledge management, and then the whole skills intelligence, skills management part of AI uses. So this is what the scale looks like. And for the longest time, we would see that the majority of AI uses are concentrated in admin tasks and learning design and content development. And then there's a big drop off the moment you go further to the right. And yeah, like the big question we tried to answer was that ideally we would like to see L&D teams move from left to right in a way to access these more sophisticated, arguably more valuable uses. But unfortunately, that's not how life works. So we came up with the immaturity model.
Let me describe the immaturity model. So it's not how life works, and yet you will see there's an awful lot of maturity models out there which seem to suggest there's an automatic escalator where you get on at the basement level, which is administration, and miraculously, by doing things that help you be more efficient with AI, you come out to the top of the escalator, able to do a skills management transformation across the organization. We could find no evidence that this actually happens. There's no evidence that people who are doing really complicated things started somewhere else in a very basic efficiency way. What we instead discovered was key factors that made a difference in people being able to do big things effectively, be on the sophisticated end of the scale. And they were, of course, you had to have basic AI readiness in the L&D team. They had to have the skills. You had to have organizational readiness. And Eglė's really good at looking at what this means in terms of the culture of the organization, in terms of the appetite for risk and change. But in particular, you had to have an open, what we call an open L&D department, a department that is ready for change and ready to take action, ready to be proactive, rather than simply do the job that L&D has traditionally done, which is to accept orders and send out content or teach people. Nothing wrong with that, but that ain't going to get you to being a transformative AI role in the organization. And rarely the key to being an open L&D department, we found, was that the leadership in that team had to be open to new ideas. That's why we use the word open. In particular, had to be comfortable with imperfect information. That's something which L&D often is very bad at. It has to be willing to take risks in an environment where success is not certain.
Yeah, I can layer a few things that are perhaps behind the maturity model. So one thing when it comes to any kind of AI adoption, I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about it from the perspective of L&D, we almost make an assumption in our language that L&D is in charge. Like it's up to L&D whether you're adopting AI well or not. A lot of the time, or most of the time, there is a dependency on the organizational strategy. There's not much L&D can do if the organization itself from the top is not putting the push, the energy, the resource, the communication, like everything, this entire sort of not leading AI adoption from the top. What we realized is that if we take a step back and think about how AI is adopted in any kind of organization or any kind of function, there are almost two high-level variables. One is culture, to Don's point. So is your culture at the organization, is it a conservative culture or innovative culture? And mandate, do you have a mandate from the organization to implement AI, or do you not have a mandate? And what helps organizations, in this case, L&D teams, move towards more sophisticated uses? It's kind of in the background. What's happening is that you're sort of putting yourself somewhere in the quadrant, because the organizations that are doing a lot, and now specifically speaking about L&D, you would not always, but most often, they are in the top right. They have both a culture which encourages individual innovation and harnesses it and sort of makes everyone fire in the same direction strategically. And they also have the strategic push from outside of L&D that the organization itself is like everyone's on, senior leadership is on board, like let's do this. And what we find in a lot of L&D teams is that they are somewhere where either you get the strategic push, but not the culture, or you get the culture that everyone likes tinkering, but the organization itself isn't putting the effort to go towards AI strategically. They're more like, here, we appreciate your innovation. Let's hope for the best, that kind of approach. So the same forces, they affect how AI is adopted in L&D. So I think and it sort of works at the macro level, but as well as the more micro level at the L&D level.
I think that's really interesting. I was listening to a podcast this morning on my drive, and one of the things that it was a panel of marketers, and they were talking about this exact same thing. They're like, our organization has this mandate, but if we weren't building that sort of muscle in our own function, it's never going to happen. So they were doing things like assigning people the opportunity every week to say, hey, this is how I'm using AI, or this is what I've created. We, in our own very tiny Red Thread group, do that. We have an AI moment at every team meeting. All right, how are you using AI, and how can you maybe think differently about what it can do and how it can do it? I'm curious, as you are talking to these organizations, and I really encourage people to read this last report. I encourage them to read all the reports. Some of the tools that you've introduced, like the complexity scale and the immaturity, what did you call it?
Immaturity model.
Immaturity model. I think that one was in the third report, and then the complexity scale is in the first. They're all excellent, and we'll put where you can link to those in the show notes. But I'm curious, as you've talked to these organizations, how much of the adoption is coming through like learning technology that is sort of like, okay, now it's here, you know what I mean? Versus somebody going out and creating their own thing. And the reason that I ask is because I was talking to, last week, we had on our podcast, Peter Manish Reber of Novo Nordisk fame, who talked to us for an hour about all the things that he's doing in his organization with AI, and they built most of it. So they didn't actually rely on external vendors to provide it. They built it. And so I'm just curious, what are you seeing in that space?
I think Peter's exceptional in the way they do stuff, and they build stuff from the ground up, and they know what they're doing. They've got a long background in dealing with data. I think generally, Eglė, would be fair to say that people aren't building stuff themselves so much these days. It's more that they're using existing technologies.
Well, it's a bit of column A, a little bit of column B, to be honest with you. And this is not, so a lot of it is coming from the research and the interviews I've had, and the interviews that couldn't be published, but I just had in preparation for the research, but also from my own work with clients. What is clear, I think that when it comes to these more sophisticated AI implementations, the go-to approach for a lot of organizations is some version of let's find a vendor that gets us, maybe 60, 70% there, and then let's customize. It's not completely off the shelf. And most organizations do not have the skills and the resource to build these things internally. So, it's in the middle.
Yeah. So, which I think is interesting because Don, both of you just introduced, you have to have a team with baseline AI skills in order to get anywhere with this. Do you think AI is putting L&D and specifically traditional L&D organizations, not just on notice, but maybe in harm's way?
The short answer is yes.
You're opening a can of worms here, Danny.
I know. That's why I had you guys on.
Nobody likes it, right? Nobody likes to be told that things are problematic. And for the first couple of years of generative AI, we had people saying, no, it's not putting your job at risk. It's people who can use AI who will put your job at risk. But try telling that to the stock photographers and to the translators who found their jobs suddenly undercut hugely. And it's not necessarily that the job disappears, but just that it changes and in particular, in some cases, becomes far less well paid. So you have a hollowing out of the middle in, for example, translation, whereby if you're translating at a diplomatic event, you still are doing that. But if you're translating the description of a book for a catalog, your job's gone. And that's all cut away. Now, with L&D, I'm trying to boil everything down. As Eglė says, it's kind of worms. But with L&D, the base level of what you can do and what is often done in L&D is often seen as the core role of L&D. Creating content can be done far more quickly now than it could ever be done before. If that's your job, if you think your job is creating content, you're not going to have a job unless you are doing it exceptionally well. And this is important. Unless you're doing it exceptionally well and that value is appreciated by the people who are buying it. The problem is that most people who buy content don't really know if it's good or not. They just see a video or a course or something and, yeah, okay, we'll buy it. It cost about the same as it did last year. That's all been turned upside down by generative AI, and you can get a video shot now which looks pretty good, and it will cost you 1/100th of what it would take in the past. And there are some great examples of that, and sometimes it'll be good learning, sometimes it'll be absolutely awful. But the people who are buying it, people who are writing the checks, not in the L&D, but elsewhere, can't tell the difference. So if L&D is aligning its value to content which is more or less generic, even if it's a little bit specific, then it's throwing away its advantage. The answer has to be start focusing on other things. Do the content, but start focusing on things. Eglė, have I managed to boil down our can of worms? That's a horrible image. Have I managed to reduce that complex argument to something that's sensible?
Oh, yeah, I really could have done without the image. So, yes, but I would add another layer on top because, yes, there is all of these almost like niche functions for content development that are getting much cheaper for good enough result. But I think it also extends to roles in teams, for example, instructional or learning design, which is also, on one hand, it's you can very well argue quite fairly that this is a profession which requires a deep understanding of a lot of important things, and it's not as simple as content development, so sort of like literally writing content. However, I think for a long time in the industry, we've had this problem that it's been quite difficult to tell what good looks like with, course or program or e-learning development. And that means that, if you see learning design, as a lot of people see, something where you put together text, image, video in a sequence, then you might be wrong, but you're going to see a very quick cost-cutting solution here. So I think to Don's point, yes, it's communicating that value and making sure that it's not just your job is valuable, but your job is perceived as valuable, or not even a job, like the tasks that you do, they're perceived as valuable. I think that's the lens that give us a bit of a sobering picture.
And to be fair, that's why we gave the strapline the race for impact, because there's two sides to that. One is, look, if you're doing content, you've got to show it has impact, but also AI provides the tools to deliver impact, but in a range of other ways as well. So that's the upside.
I think it's interesting because what you're both talking about has made me think of Don, I think we've talked about this since the dawn of time, the need of L&D to show impact. Like that seems to be their major motivation is we got to show impact. We got to show ROI to the organization. We got to show that we're worth our value. But it almost feels like that is true right now, that if we don't know what good is, then we have to change the things we're doing, number one, but we also have to have a sense ourselves for how we explain that to the organization and why it's important. I was talking to Lisa Christensen at McKinsey, and she was saying this thing, and I wouldn't have expected it to come from Lisa because they're a very learning organization and culture and all this stuff. But she was saying we're finding ourselves in a place where we have to show the value that we're providing to the organization. Do either of you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got thoughts on that. She's right, but I think it does show that if McKinsey are saying this, then goodness knows it affects all of us. And it's not at a transactional level. In the past, we were able to think about the L&D department providing training, and training was a transactional activity which could be coupled to a particular metric. What I think AI has done is shift that emphasis from training to something else. So, yes, the training can continue, but it's so much more of a quotidian, a daily thing that we don't have to think about that so much, but we should be thinking instead of our relationships with the business and us using those to establish the areas in which L&D is adding value, which may not have a monetary value attached to it, but it is meeting the needs of the organization. And that's something which L&D traditionally has found very difficult to do. And it's why I talk about the need for leaders to be comfortable with ambiguous and incomplete information. We don't know that if you do X, Y will happen and you'll get patted on the back. What we know is that there's a very fuzzy problem around Z. And yeah, if you can go and tackle it and it looks like you've helped, great, then you're pushing things forward. And that's much less well-defined. It requires a different sort of leadership. And it requires, I think, a more entrepreneurial view of L&D from the leaders and from the members of the team. Eglė, got any more coherent thoughts than me?
Just building on that, I feel like if we think about the scope of L&D's work, I think the edge of it is expanding in a way, because before, when we would think about ROI, and to your point, Dawn, I myself feel quite conflicted about this whole, I put in this X resource and Y popped out at the end, because it's for some things like sales or something like that, you can do that. For a lot of things, you cannot. Keeping in mind that we need to be cautious about monetizing everything, because some things are cumulative and sort of touch on the other things that create value. Before, we would think about ROI in terms of, okay, so we create a training, how do we capture the value of that training? But now, if you think about the forces that are affecting how learning is done in the organization because of AI, both at the individual and organizational levels. So one simple thing is that we are now seeing different platforms that help people in their functions to do their jobs better, taking away both the need to upskill and to support performance, and just pretty much helps them they integrate themselves into the task itself. Another thing we're seeing is that in organizations where people are quite skilled and excited about AI, they're now creating their own ways to upskill themselves. Essentially, they're skilled enough to ask AI to help them master the subject, or just to create a little GPT for themselves to help them do their tasks better. That means that the scope of work and what the most powerful levers are in the organization, they are also now becoming more diverse for L&D. It's not that before we'd have the variable of, okay, so if we do training, if we give people skills, then something good is going to happen. Yes, we still have that, but we also now need to keep in mind the whole system of how performance happens, because it's the interaction between the human and the tool and the timeliness of the support that you're offering, which means that it's both an opportunity for L&D to be more integrated into the business instead of being something in the background that's giving training to everyone. It also makes the impact arguably more difficult to quantify as well when it's so integrated. You cannot isolate the impact of this one thing when you're thinking about the whole system.
Yeah. I often wonder if there's going to be this period in the near future where everyone's like, we don't need L&D. We can create courses with, a chat bot or whatever. We get rid of a bunch of L&D people with some pretty deep expertise in how people learn and how to develop skills, and then the world goes to hell. I often wonder, though, if that is going to happen, where we see this major dive of stuff, and before we realize the importance of these skills in organizations, and even maybe more than the skills, the stewardship of somebody looking after the development of humans in the organization, which if you take the L&D functional way, it almost entirely falls upon managers, which we know is a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, but to your point, it's not an unimaginable future. It's not unimaginable that an organization might look at what value L&D adds and think that, we're just going to plug AI into our knowledge base, which allows people to find the information that they need. We're gonna enable them to create content themselves, so that if they need to share something, and if we need some specialty skill, we're just going to bring in a vendor, do some training, whatnot. I think that in some organizations, I'm sure a lot of your listeners as well, so it's not I'm sort of trying to add nuance here, but also make a point without a lot of waffling. In some L&D organizations, that is unimaginable, because the value that they create and the way they communicate that value to the rest of the business is so much more than that. But there are plenty of other organizations where definitely, if you take L&D away, if the only thing that L&D was doing was creating courses, and I know this conversation, in a lot of organizations it has moved on, but in a lot of organizations it hasn't, then you can argue that, these courses are going to be a bit worse, but a little bit worse versus a lot cheaper as a trade-off.
We are going to maybe go into lightning round. Lightning round just gives us an opportunity to get to know you both on a little bit more personal level. And then I have two final sort of questions on hypotheticals and sort of aspirations. And then I want to deep dive into some of the specific things you found with respect to how people are using AI. Does that sound good? Okay. Yep. So let's start with the first question. This is for either of you. What do you do to get rid of stress?
Eglė can answer this one.
Because Don, you just shelve all yours. Is that what?
I'm British. I refuse to acknowledge that I have stress.
Fair enough.
You embrace stress. So lately, I have been really into sauna and cold plunging, specifically both of them, not either or. If I need a full reset, I've noticed that it really helps my system restart and have you tried it?
I have not, but we have a lake in the backyard, so I'm wondering.
Yeah, sauna with that lake, and there's something about the contrast that it does something physiologically, that it doesn't just relax you because you're sitting in a warm room for an hour. It's really the contrast thing. It just restarts things. Like you feel differently. You sleep differently immediately. And it just, for me, that's the hard restart button. And actually, I'm doing this later this evening. So I'm very excited about that. And I would recommend you two to do it. Donald, I've been lobbying for months.
I keep telling Eglė that I'm going to get round to it at some point, just when I can get all this work that's causing me all this stress out of the way.
Well, I mean, you're launching. You're having a launch party for your thing next week. So maybe after that.
Yeah. There's a flaw in your system, Don, if you're waiting to be extremely stressed out to be able to manage your stress.
Can't see what the flaw could possibly be. What's the next question?
If you could know the answer to any question, what would it be?
This sounds really weird, but for me, it would be, when did humans start speaking? It sounds really obtuse, right, and really arcane. But for me, there are so many things that stem from this. Did we start speaking all together, one language together in Africa before we started moving out? Did it evolve on the way? Or did language spring up simultaneously in different parts of the world, which has tremendous implications in terms of how we think about what we see, how we express it, and how we communicate with each other? There are more vowel sounds within languages within Africa, for example, than there are elsewhere. As you spread out from the African continent, the number of vowel sounds tends to decline. There are a lot of vowel sounds in English just because it's a pidgin mix-up of lots of other languages. But generally, they get fewer. There's something that indicates we probably all started at the same time. I'd love to know when, and I'd love to know what people were saying when they first worked out they could speak.
I love that so much. Two thoughts on that. The first one is, have you read the book, Our Magnificent Bastard Tongue? It's a history of the English language. It's fantastic.
No, I am reading another one at the moment called Amorous or Loving, which is a history of the English language.
Nice.
So,
okay, I love that. The other one is, I was actually thinking about this very question last night because we're reading the Magic Treehouse series with my son, Jack. He's 4. And it's a kid book, and they travel back in time, and they traveled back in the time of the Cro-Magnons, and so I was like, when did they start speaking? So that's super timely. That's super interesting. Anyway, Eglė, how about you?
Well, you're very down to earth, Don, because if I had to know an answer, if I could know the answer to any question, I would ask, why are we here? What's the nature of the universe and consciousness?
Oh, wow.
So superficial. I feel terrible now.
Yes, I don't even know how to tackle it, Eglė. Good question. I think everyone has it. Final question for you both. Tell us a weird fact that you happen to know for no reason.
I have a favorite banana fact that I have. That nearly all bananas eaten in the West, the so-called Cavendish bananas, they are clones descended from a single plant grown in here in the UK.
Oh, really?
In a greenhouse, yes. And they are genetic clones, like they weren't just, they're actual clones of the same tree. So here you go. Use it as you will.
Well, I think we should get into banana futures because I think there's a risk that the banana supply will be drastically foreshortened because if they're all clones, if one tree gets a disease, they could all come down.
That's the problem.
Exactly. So I think short bananas, that's the answer. Expectation of a crash or a peak in banana prices in the future. My own weird fact is that the Eiffel Tower expands 6 inches in summer because it is made of metal. It gets hot, it grows. Of course, it contracts 6 inches in winter as well. Otherwise, it would be perpetually getting slightly taller each year. So there we are.
Very nice. If you ever want to have some fun, ask these questions to a researcher because we wormhole like nobody else. Awesome. Let's jump back into the discussion about AI and learning. So I have 2 final questions and they're philosophical in nature. The first one is kind of stemming from the podcast I was listening to again this morning. How do we keep the human in the tech? So as we get more used to AI and the things that AI can output, I personally am getting better at determining what was written by AI and what wasn't. So I'm wondering, like, how do we determine what are the things that need a human touch? And how do we make sure that those human things stay in the loop, particularly when it comes to developing other humans?
I think a lot about Joshua Verloc when you say this is a guy based in London who is doing some tremendously interesting work in terms of personal productivity with AI. And he described himself recently as he doesn't do work anymore. He designs systems that do the work for him, which is kind of what you might say theoretically, but I've seen what he's doing and I'm just absolutely blown away by it. For him, the human side of it is having the imagination and the creativity to imagine what you might do and then the skill to execute it. And I think that's a slightly different answer to what we'd normally expect, which is the answer I'd give, which is that the human stays in the loop in the interhuman or intra-human interaction. So when we talk to each other, I was at an event yesterday in Bratislava, and a lot of people were very concerned about the future L&D, but we were all agreeing quite furiously that facilitation is a skill that will never probably be done well by AI because it requires too much nuanced understanding of human behavior. And I think that is certainly an area where we can expect humans to continue to flourish. But I think we are only at the very, very beginning of a revolution in which AI, it becomes the electricity of the economy for the future. And it is involved in absolutely everything. It becomes invisible. And so much so that we don't even notice we're using it, but the human skills we have become more important on top.
I was thinking about the gray area because there are some things that are quite straightforward that, for example, when it comes to, for example, doctors, for diagnostics, you might be okay with AI, but for bedside manner, you would want to be seen and heard by a real human. But there are some areas that are emerging right now where it's not that easy to say what's the limit for where the AI should finish and where the human should begin. So one of these is art. For example, on one hand, some people use AI to, AI makes art more accessible. You don't need to have a production crew to be able to create some sort of almost like movie or realize your idea or whatever it is, and you can experiment in very interesting ways. It helps people be more, I guess, to express their ideas from whether it's image or video or music, AI being part of the creative process. And, in industrial settings or like in corporate settings, it helps with mock-ups and communicating your ideas and maybe doing more interesting things. On the other hand, art is also something that is deeply human, and we kind of want to see it as something that's an expression from one human to another. So if an AI creates something, which it right now very easily can and does, something that looks like human-made art or human-made music, there's almost like a sense of grossness if you find out that, I've been listening to an AI tune. So, what's the right mix here? Or, for example, relationships, where on one hand, the creepiness of using AI as romantic companions is something that it's really quite something to wrap your head around. On the other hand, you can argue that literally the same companion chatbots, they help very lonely people to feel like they're not alone in the world. So I think these are the questions that are going to be the interesting questions to figure out. And because it's almost even the same use by different people or for a different purpose might feel different.
Yeah. My final question in this sort of along these veins is something that Don alluded to. It's the electricity. I call it, we're swimming in the water. How long is it before we're swimming in the water of AI and we're not necessarily talking about AI anymore? And the reason that I asked this is because I was at HR Tech recently, and I saw a huge jump from last year to this year on the number of organizations that were talking about what they can do because of AI instead of the fact that they had AI. So I'm curious from your standpoint and the research that you've done, how long is it before AI is just part of the air that we breathe?
On to answer, I'm going to go back to the 19th century and think about electricity. And you think about Frankenstein, of course, was written by Mary Shelley at the very beginning of the 19th century, based on her seeing people, traveling showmen, traveling the countryside, putting electricity through dead frogs and dead dogs to show them moving their limbs. So there was an awareness of electricity very early on. It was some strange sort of mystical power, perhaps the stuff of life. We go on to the production of industrial electricity, which doesn't really get rolled out until the end of the 19th century. And even then it gets rolled out really badly. It's only in the beginning part of the 20th century people work out how to use electricity properly. Now, it is not going to take us 100 years to get to swimming in the water of AI. But it isn't going to happen overnight either. I still think that we're going to be, I would say it's going to be at least 10 years before we just accept that, of course, we've got this thing we're plugging in, and yeah, it's called AI, but whatever, it's one of 100 different ways in which you can use this thing we call AI. I think it's going to be, I would say it's at least a decade until it happens. But the transition to it being part of the toolkit and understood as being something, of course, you use rather than a novelty, that's happening now, as you say.
Egla's nodding. Anything to add, Egla?
I'm thinking about what will be the first sign. And I don't think it's going to take 10 years. But the first sign, I think, is going to be when, for example, in learning technology specifically, or learning industry, awards. Because right now you have these awards for best AI use in learning or best AI transformation or things like that. And I think in a few years, it just everything will be that. Like any category is going to have AI use in it.
A really good one, Eglė. I wish I'd thought of that. Can we go back and re-record this, Danny?
You talked a little bit earlier about some of the things that are happening with AI. So content creation obviously is still number one. You mentioned analytics, which excites me to no end. Coaching, some adaptive feedback, those types of things. It feels like we've been talking about some of these things for years, and we haven't necessarily had the tools to do that. But with AI, they're becoming possible. And I'm wondering, do you see that same thing?
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to talk very quickly about the method that we use in understanding how people are using things. And Eglė, if you could jump in with some specific examples, that would be great. So the whole point about this research is to show what are people actually doing with this, and then to try to draw some conclusions. One question we have is, we've got a list of things, 12 things, pick which of these things you're using it for. Great. We have the free text box as well. Just describe how you're using it. From that, 600 people generate 20,000 words. That's about a novella, right? So if you read Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis, that's about 20,000 words long, right? So it's a book that we have to read to understand what's going on. We have two ways of analyzing those words. One is to go through both with analysis tools and also just reading it and putting them into categories. But the other way of doing it is just to count the times that certain words are mentioned. And the reason for doing that is it gives you a sort of a completely cold, objective way of saying, yeah, people are talking about this more. So if you look at, for example, analysis, and you look at data, and you look at research, these are words, or actually we look at the word stem, but anyway, these are words that are used increasingly frequently in that free text box. So the top four are the same. They're all about designing content, but analysis was the 28th most used word stem in 23. It was the 5th most used one this year. And the same sort of meteoric leap has been seen for data and for research as well, from really low down to being in the top 10 of the most used words. That's a really objective way of saying people are using it for this. Eglė, I've set the scene for you beautifully. What are they doing with this stuff?
Yeah, so analytics, as we talked before, qualitative analysis, coaching, and adaptive feedback, all of these things, they are happening. And I think it's important to recognize, but when we're talking about, are people using it for content or for other things? I think all organizations are doing something with AI for content. Like you take the most advanced organization, they are still using the same video development, avatar tools, content writing, images, whatever. So it's not saying that, you stop doing that and you do other things. It's more like it's a yes and kind of situation. And ultimately, content was never the point, was it? Should have always been a means to an end. You create content to help people develop a skill or help them perform better, not for the sake of it. And now AI is giving us better ways to achieve that. Instead of reading content in a static course, how about you get a lot of practice and get feedback on exactly what you said, or coaching. Here's something that can help you reflect on things, which we know is a crucial part of learning on the job, learning from experience, and so on. And of course, with analytics, it's about doing not just things right, but also the right things. Even if it's just qualitative analysis of post-course survey feedback forms, it helps you see sentiments, it helps you see knowledge gaps that are emergent, it helps you see trends over time. So it's a huge unlock for learning teams that were barely doing anything with AI just two years ago. So I think it's a good thing that we're exploring these avenues. And instead of trading faster horse, we are exploring how AI can help us do the right things better, not just the wrong things faster.
I always say, look, AI is like wine and caffeine. It lets you do stupid things faster. It's a real problem. What's I've been impressed by is how we see learning and development people actually going out and asking questions and using AI to answer questions with data in a way that I honestly wasn't expecting last year.
So you've both mentioned this idea of like faster content. That's where people have been for a little while. As we look at it more broadly for HR, we call it little AI and big AI in our trends work. Little AI is the stuff that sort of enables the individual to do their job faster and maybe even better. Big AI is once we systematize it and have the data centralized and can do, the agents. You all talked about agents in your report as well. Those types of things are going on. How do people get, or how do organizations get, or how do L&D leaders lead their teams from faster content or little AI to a higher level of maturity, like smarter practice stage?
I'm getting the sense that Eglė wants to come here.
Oh, I do. This is something, it's one of the fundamental things, the value of leadership that I noticed in the interviews I did for this piece of research, as well as, again, working with organizations and seeing what's the difference between what they end up accomplishing depending on the kind of leadership that they have. I feel like at a high level, learning leaders, sort of like L&D leaders, they need to be three things. They need to be learning leaders. So they need to understand what learning looks like, what performance looks like in the organization. They need to have a point of view on that. They need to be business leaders. So they need to be plugged into the business, know what's happening, know what's important. So again, thinking outside of your own L&D silo and thinking about how you're not what you do, your output is not the end in itself. It's something that helps a higher level output happen. And they need to be people leaders. So they need to tap into the good old classical leadership skills of helping your team through transition. There is a lot of fear happening. There is a lot of indifference happening, because we talk about excitement or fear, but indifference is another thing that is important that can lead to complacency. So they need to go back to these fundamentals. And when I was looking at the kind of what makes, and anecdotally, what were the features of those leaders that were leading their teams from that gooey, hazy AI something into, okay, so we know what we're doing and we are going in that direction. Like, I don't know everything, but I know that this is roughly what we're doing. So one thing is that flipping from content to performance as a yardstick is a different way of thinking about the purpose of your L&D team. And it was very clear to me that the leaders who are doing industry leading things with AI, they think in a very particular way. They think from the perspective of the business, not L&D. So for example, if you ask them, what are your key projects? They would say priority 1 is X because it would do Y for the business. And it's something that's often, not very sexy. It's not this bells and whistles thing. It can be something very menial, some sort of process improvement by 10%. Say that the priority is this because it's important for the business, instead of saying that we are launching a new AI-powered LMS. In both cases, they might be launching something like that, but the difference lies in what you see as your end goal. And what happens in L&D internally is almost never the end goal for the business. So the big deal is business impact, not what L&D sees as a big deal for itself. And these leaders, what I've noticed is they also have a very strong view or point of view on how learning works and what performance looks like in the business. And that leads them to have clarity around what value-add activities L&D should focus on improving or adding to their portfolio. So what the areas of impact are. And once a person has that vision and intuition, they immediately disregard content-driven L&D work and discourse. They just naturally view the value of AI and L&D differently. So I think this is one of the, going back to your earlier question about what it takes to move, from left to right, from simpler uses to more sophisticated uses of AI. It's one of these elements where it's not just a skill or time that you put into this. It's a different way of thinking where your knowledge of AI, your knowledge of learning, your knowledge of the business, and you as a person and the way you think, they all come together.
Can I just add to that very slightly? Because I think that this actually goes beyond AI just by itself. I think it's something which is generally true, but AI has exacerbated this. Everything Eglė has said is true for what makes a good learning leader, but actually has always been true for good leaders in L&D departments. For me, there are 5 factors which are involved. The person who leads well understands the context of the organization. They know what matters in the organization. The mattering bit comes over to value. They know not just the context of where the organization sits, but what is valued and what the measures of success are. They're able to focus. That's a crucial thing that we don't see well enough in most L&D teams. That ability to say, okay, there are 10 things we could do. We have time for 3. These are the 3 we're going to do. And there's our North Star that we're going to stick to. And in getting the team to come with them, they are really good with people. So they've got context, value, focus, and people. Those things which they're all good at, which every leader should be good at. There's this additional thing that I've noticed with L&D leaders who are really good, which is it's a bit intangible. It's an attitude. It's a kind of, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to make it happen. There's a sort of entrepreneurial, going to make it happen, can-do attitude, which doesn't rely on other people's praise, but has an internal drive to success. I can't put it any more succinctly than that, but those are the people that really stand out and are going to make a difference, I think, in AI and L&D.
I love both of those answers so much because, Don, I think we started our relationship talking about the L&D ghetto. And how leaders need to sort of get out of it and think of the organizational goals and strategy first. And I do think you're right, Eglė. I think it's exacerbating that problem a lot right now. Final question. One of the things that I loved about this report is the fact that you talked about futures with an S on the end. Futures for L&D, not like this is what's going to happen for everybody in the entire world. This is how you should address it. But you specifically chose 3 futures. And I would love for you all just to talk through that for a minute and tell us what those futures are and how do you choose which one you are.
Do this is for me to describe the overall format of it and then Eglė to jump in and give some detail on each one.
Okay.
And I should say that it came as a result of a tremendous amount of work done, partly by me, but mostly by Eglė, going through those interviews, those use cases and working out, well, what does it all mean? And then you sit in the sauna and you have a conversation with people, and then finally this stuff comes to the surface. Light, I think it was Wittgenstein said, light dawns slowly over the whole. That was certainly the case with this. But the triangle we produced, the transformation triangle, has resonated with people. We suggest that in the past, L&D has been focused on content. It needs to move away from that for the reasons we've discussed. And there are 3 different points you can go to. Well, I'll list them, then I'll ask Eglė to be my expert witness. Skills authority, enablement partner, and adaptation engine. The skills authority one is the one I'd like to start with. It means for me that learning and development becomes the custodians of skills in the organization, making sure not just that there's a taxonomy of skills, but it's the plumbing through which spreads throughout the organizations and through which performance is understood. Eglė, that's my top level summary. Do you want to just give us some more detail on that?
So imagine you have a consulting company, and I'm using consulting company not because it very much depends on your industry, but because this is an example where the skills that the person has, it's very visible because the revenue depends on their skills, they're client facing. So it's very clear whether you have those skills or not. So in this kind of environment, L&D might choose to reassert itself and say that, okay, our job is to get people the skills, and we are the function that is best placed in a company to do that. And what that means is, I feel like skills authority is one of these things that a lot of L&D teams, when they see the triangle, they might immediately feel like, oh, skills authority is where I want to be at. But it's not as easy as saying that, okay, so now we're going to be specialized in skill building. No, you actually need to have the expertise to build those skills. You need to know that there's a difference between giving people content and developing a skill. So it depends on this deep expertise of how you build those skills and help people practice and make sure that they have the ability to perform and the confidence and everything that they need on the job. But it's also very important that you're targeted and that you know what skills are needed, because you have to have both. You cannot just have the expertise in building skills, but don't know what the priority strategic skills are, or just have the intelligence that, again, is something that's happening right now in some organizations where you get the skills intelligence, but at the end of this skill identification, there's not much happening on top of that. So you need to have both deep expertise in the subject and the analytics and the ability to see where the strategic value lies. And this is how L&D earns its place, its strategic place, and how it gains weight in the organization, because then they can show that we are the custodians of a critical business resource, because business cannot make money. The business model depends on people having certain skills. And if we are able to grow that resource, then we become an essential part of the business, not just a supporting function. And this is how stepping into the skills authority, this is how it's different from the current content-focused L&D.
I would stress that business being a skills authority rests on not just L&D's ability to do this, but also, as we've talked about, the willingness and acceptance of the organization that skills are important, not just important, but are crucial. So that's why the consultancy argument or example is so important, because it's probably self-evident in an organization like that, yes, we know skills are important, help us deal with them. In other organizations, it will be more complicated and difficult to win the argument over skills. Some organizations have a culture of understanding skills, like consultancies. Others, it will take longer to persuade them.
This is an important point, that it's not just L&D deciding what it wants to be. It's about what kind of context you're operating in, which allows you to assume one of the places in the triangle.
The enablement partner, which is the second node on our triangle, is where L&D changes its role. It could sound a lot like, oh, it's just an example of decentralized L&D, but it's much more than that. This is where L&D recognizes good work that's done out elsewhere in the organization, encourages, supports, and amplifies it, and also provides people locally with the means to do this work. And the work we're talking about is, creating stuff and so on, but more than that. Eglė, do you want to give us an idea? If L&D is helping the rest of the organization learn as an enablement partner, what's it doing?
It's essential. I think the easiest way to imagine that is L&D saying, okay, we don't know best. We have a really good quote in the report where someone said that once you give people the tools and the knowledge to help themselves, they can create what they need for themselves, you realize that they can create better ideas and better tools and solutions for themselves than L&D ever could, because L&D does not know their job as intimately as they do. In this case, L&D says, you know what, we don't know best. We're going to give people the tools and support that they need, perhaps some structure so that they can capture and spread that knowledge. And then L&D itself goes up on the strategy ladder. So there are three things happening here. So one is that there is the infrastructure to enable people to communicate to either, it might be a decentralized LMS where people create their own content that they can share locally with their own teams. It can be a platform that enables people to create their own, custom GPTs, Copilot Studio, or some custom platform, whatever it is, about creating, giving people the tools to capture and share the knowledge. It's about creating processes to support them, because you cannot just say that, okay, so you do your thing, bye-bye, we are going up the strategy ladder. No, we're not interested anymore. You are making sure that you create processes that people feel supported and that their efforts are legitimized. And then the final one is obviously you need to have the culture where there's a lot of trust, both in the employee expertise and there's a lot of trust between the business and L&D. So that's what it might look like.
I think these two sound like L&D. Skills authority, yeah, we recognize that sort of hands in our wheelhouse. Enablement partner, we can recognize we're supporting other people doing things. But the third node, the adaptation engine, is something very different. I'm going to just leave that one, Eglė. Eglė, what happens in the adaptation engine?
Yeah. So when I think about the triangle, I imagine the three verbs. So you can reassert and become a skills authority. You can reposition and become an enablement partner, and you can reforge and become an adaptation engine. And I'm using the word reforge intentionally because it implies a dramatic transformation and something that might be quite painful. So essentially, in this future, L&D is no longer a standalone function. It gets absorbed into a blended team that addresses business challenges holistically and builds adaptability across the organization. So the crucial difference is that L&D no longer approaches challenges by carving out the learning slice of a wider problem. Because right now, even if you work in a cross-functional team, you probably do, the learning part of it. So imagine some sort of AI transformation, right? If L&D is brought in a cross-functional team, L&D is doing usually just AI upskilling. It doesn't look at the whole system, the tech, how people work with technology and so on. An example of adaptation engine would be where L&D is not a team anymore and there's no dedicated L&D person anymore. It's about a sort of cross-functional team which takes a business problem and they have very diverse skills. So it can be, they're not L&D learning or any kind of people-related skills necessarily. You, of course, have those skills, but they can be design and tech and sciences and whatnot, depending on the company context. And then you solve these problems just like you would build a product as a startup. You come together, you identify the problem, and you see what can be done without, one person saying that, okay, so I'm going to go away and solve this problem from a learning perspective. So imagine if L&D or HR is absorbed under IT, you don't have L&D as we know it under IT in that case. You would have a very different team for creating, say, technical infrastructure for performance. And as part of that, they may need to make sure that employees have the complementary skills to work in tandem with technology. So there's still the need to build skills, but there's no dedicated function just for that. So what you have is perhaps a skill set within a team, among other skills like design, tech, ops, whatever it is needed to shape these decisions. And again, because this is such a new thing, I don't want to anchor people and to let them think that, okay, so it's about L&D becoming IT. No, it can be L&D being absorbed into a broader people operation, broader IT operation, and broader ops continuous improvement operation. But it's the point is that L&D is no more. And if we can conceptualize the triangle, we have centralized, then we have decentralized L&D, and decentralized that's not L&D anymore, like at a high level.
All of those sound significantly more interesting than L&D right now. And I think that's the interesting part. Like a lot of people are really worried about what's going to happen with L&D because of AI, but all of the futures that you just defined are much more engaging and much more interesting than a classic L&D department.
And also, Danny, they're more challenging. They're tougher to do. All of this was inspired, and the model was inspired in part, or at least my reflection on it, was this poem came to my mind from Yeats, where the famous line is, "Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world." This sense that things are exploding and there's a chaotic change. That's where we are right now. But it doesn't mean we have to give up. As you say, there are real futures we can go towards.
I love that you quote Yeats in an L&D and AI study. I saw that. I was like, yep, that's Don and Eglė right there. We are at the end of our time together. Two things I want to ask you before we end. The first one is, where can people read this marvelous report and the other three that go along with it?
They can go to my website, or the website which we use to host the information, or you can go to Eglė's website, and I'm sure we'll put the links to both of those in the notes. Mine is donaldhtaylor.co.uk.
Mine is notes.works/reports, and you're going to find all 4 reports there.
Awesome. And we will make sure to put those in the show notes. Final question we ask everybody that comes on our podcast: why do you do the work that you do?
I started working as a trainer to make people's lives better. And I rapidly realized that helping individuals was only one part of the story, and you had to help organizations that employed people. And you had to help individuals and organizations flourish. I firmly believe that AI gives us the tools for the job if we have the imagination to put it to use.
Yeah, and on my end, I honestly find it intellectually stimulating, creating order out of chaos, and there's a lot of chaos right now. and helping others do the same. That is a great challenge that gives me great satisfaction. But also my work, both my consulting work and research that helps inform my consulting, gives me a sense of autonomy, because once you understand how we can harness AI, how we can wield it, you start feeling like it's not just happening to you, that the technology, any technology, it's neutral. And there are right now a lot of incentives to use it in harmful ways that are out of our control, but we can also use it in ways that can hopefully benefit us. So yes, the world is changing, but there's something that we can do about it.
Thank you. Eglė and Don, thank you so much for being with us. I'm sure we'll be circling back around when reporting.
I hope we'll be here for it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If this podcast got you thinking differently about how work happens, that's what we're here for. We dig into these topics every week in our research and in the Red Thread community. The Red Thread community is a place where people, leaders, and practitioners come together to compare notes, share what's working, and maybe challenge those things that aren't working so well. You can join for free at redthreadresearch.com/membership. Or if you or your organization are ready to go deeper, take a look at our professional and our enterprise memberships. For professional tier, for listeners, you can use the promotional code STORIES, STORIES, for a 10% discount. If you're a tech provider trying to make sense of this space, our tech consortium is where smart vendors are coming together to learn from each other and from the market. You'll find everything at redthreadresearch.com. I'm Danny Johnson. Thanks for listening and for caring about making work better.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread Research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.